welcome to Textiles Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group. I'm the Advertising and Marketing Manager for HGA, and I get to be your host today. Today's episode is sponsored by Made in America Yarns. They have a full range of beautiful and unique yarns. Go see everything at madeinamericayarns.com, and they're all made in Philadelphia. Today, we will take questions for the last 15 minutes of the episode. So if you would please put your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat. Feel free to leave messages, but the questions need to be in Q&A or we won't see them. Today, we have Lilly Marsh. Lilly is the owner of Lilly Marsh Studios in Glen Falls, New York. Lilly has had several decades of fiber work, ranging from sheep farming to gallery exhibits, academic research, and textile production. Her focus has been transforming local farm fibers into home decor and wearable fabric. Her artwork's been exhibited throughout the United States and Canada. She has a PhD from Purdue, and it's an American Studies program where she combined art history, studio art, anthropology, and culture. Lilly is the founding member of the Hudson Valley Project, whose goal is to strengthen the fiber supply chain to cloth production. She also names her Looms, so I can't wait to hear more about that. Hey, Lilly.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
Well, the very first question is always the most important. What's your favorite tea?
Well, I am not much of a tea drinker. In fact, when people ask me about tea, I remember my mother imploring me to be more ladylike. So there's always a little, makes me think of ladies. Anyway, but I do have bottled water all the time in the studio. It was occurring to me that, having a background in archival research really taught me to, don't have food and drink anywhere it can be spilled. I sit with my water on the floor at all times. So yeah. we learn from our histories.
Well, let's get started with, how did you get started in fiber arts?
Well, I, like a lot of people, was a young mom, and I started knitting, and pretty quickly found out that I absolutely could not follow a pattern to save my life. I used to make the most horrendous mistakes and then try and make them into somehow design elements, just some weird thing I was making. But I pretty quickly discovered Elizabeth Zimmerman in the early 80s, her first book, Knitting Without Tears, and started realizing that I could invent my own patterns. And that was just such an open door for me to really explore things. And one of the things I really liked about her was her foregrounding of materials, and that these were real materials with real properties that needed to be taken into consideration. And the fact that these were real materials in real hands, they were our hands, right? And so that just brought everything to a real personal background to me. My husband and I moved to a farm because I couldn't buy wool, and so instead we bought sheep, and I raised Cordell sheep for about 20 years. And I think a lot of, when possibilities are endless, you can just go do those things. And so I started, hand spinning. I was a knitter and a hand spinner for a long time. And the spinners in my town were all weavers. So I started hanging out with the Weavers Guild, and, they led me down the path of darkness towards true fiber arts. And, it just sort of it kept rolling from there. Now I have, multiple looms. I was so fascinated as a weaver. I was in a gallery and I started getting interested, talking to customers about how it is that they interacted with our creativity. I found that absolutely fascinating. People would come into the gallery and start to talk about why they didn't feel like they could be creative. And I found, how we generate those ideas about ourselves to be so fascinating on a cultural level, that's when I decided to go back to school and start exploring some of those ideas. And so I found the American Studies program at Purdue, and they, of course, as African American studies scholars, as women's studies scholars, as people who were interested in in some of the more enduring issues of our time. When I would talk about Elizabeth Zimmerman, you could see that their eyes would glaze over a little bit because they were like, this is knitting, right? And then I would talk about creativity and they would get more interested. And by the end of it, they were just so supportive of my work. They just loved what I was doing there. So that was a lot of fun. And then when my husband and I moved to New York after I finished school, you know, I found here just such a community of local fiber, local processing. This is, it's kind of rare here that, and there's this lovely mill, Batenkill fiber mill, to work with, and just really fell into this work of being able to support the whole fiber chain. And I must admit, I find that my sense of fiber as sort of this meeting place between the natural world of agriculture and the human world of creativity and innovation and ideas. I find that to be just this incredibly rich space for me. So you ask a question later about thinking outside the box, and man, have I been like thinking, oh, and that's another space in between boxes. So it's been really rich for me to even think about these questions you're asking me.
Well, and that's one thing I did want to ask you, because you do think outside the box. I mean, you didn't go to Purdue and get a degree in engineering, or you didn't go to Purdue and get a degree in weaving. You took all these different areas and combined them to make the degree that you wanted or needed. And then with the Hudson Textile Project, it's like you and a group of people, not just you, I want to give credit where it's due, but you looked at the situation and you said, how can we bring together the farmers, the producers, the shops, and the consumers? And so you started the Hudson Textile Project.
Yeah, so, the Hudson Valley Textile Project.
Hudson Valley Textile Project. So how does that thinking outside the box impact on your artwork? Where would we see that?
Well, I find it a little difficult to separate my artwork from the rest of my work, right? I mean, when I give that some serious thought, I think that my artwork is really about the community, right? And there are a number of scholars and artists. There's an indigenous textile person, a professor, Riley Kucharan, up in Ontario, I think, who's written extensively about indigenous workways as being part of a community. There's several other artists who are really starting to move in the direction of I guess when I was doing artwork that was a little more traditional, in the sense when I was doing a lot of knitted wire sculptural work and showing in exhibitions and had one-person shows, I felt like it was a way of yelling a lot, this is me, this is me. And now I've gotten old enough and more interested in hearing, who are you? Who are you? And so, I mean, there's still a part to say, hi, I'm Lily, who are you? but I find that much more difficult thing to sort of separate out from the question of what is my artwork, right? So, I mean, I love wool. I will do pretty much anything in wool. I love dyeing it. I love spinning it. I haven't spun professionally in years, you know, but I do a lot of production for blankets and shawls and scarves. I do a lot of wholesale work. I find that I'm just endlessly fascinated with the idea of the different kinds of breeds that we have here and the different ways to blend them and how those can be shifted in one direction or other towards softness or loft or towards durability and crispness. And I just find that manipulation to be endlessly fascinating, just endlessly fascinating.
Well, you weave some beautiful blankets and scarves, and we have a couple examples here. Were these items the first things you started weaving when you first started out, or are these your items of choice?
Well, when I first started weaving, I was doing a lot of tencel and such. But as I became more certain about what I wanted to be working on, I did move more pretty exclusively to wool. And so now that I'm here in this area that is so rich in natural fibers, I have all sorts of wool that I can work with. I especially like doing all sorts of breeds. We tend to think a lot in the fiber world, or maybe 5 or 10 years ago, I think more people are becoming more interested in breed specific stuff, that we tend to think of merino as the best, right? As if best is some sort of generally understood term, or, you know, like it's some label that has meaning. Because I think of best as best for what purpose, to what process, to what, you know, all sorts of context there. But I've had a very good time playing with some of the rarer breeds here. Well, a big project that I did this last year was a neighbor up here, an hour couple up in the, actually in the High Peaks region of the Adirondacks, from Blue Pepper Farm. They run a East Frisian dairy sheep operation. They sell farm-made yogurt, but they also work with their own wool and sell it. One year she sold me the entire clip, and I had it blended with a little alpaca and sent to Batenkill, and they spun it. And I was able to really experiment with working with singles that were then plied for blankets and for sewing yardies. It just was the most amazing cloth. But it's a wool that no one would, you know, nobody in the fiber world would say, oh, we need to buy East Frisian wool for this. I mean, it would be something that would be more generally thought of for industrial uses, you know, like tennis ball covers or something. Not ever considered for garment or home decor. But it's a really stunning little wool if you handle it right. You know, if you pay attention, if you use all your skills as a weaver, you can bring all its wonderful characteristics out. So that's just been a super education for me.
Well, I know you do a lot of commissions. We even have an image of a stack of your work, of these blankets that are getting ready to ship down. I think these are a white twill blanket. And a lot of weavers refuse to do commissions. They don't like them for a variety of reasons. So what is it that you enjoy about doing these commissions? And what's the difficult part about doing a commission?
There are difficulties. I rather like doing commission because this again goes back to falling between two boxes, because I like having a couple of different things that I can do. I love doing commission. Of course, I don't do one piece at a time. I have a minimum order that I will do for people. But I like that exercise that I get from the mill, right? It becomes that old design exercise of, here's a rectangular box, you put in 3 colors and 2 geometric shapes, go. Make one design, make another design, make another design. So that when the mill, I usually work with the mill in my commission work. When the mill comes to me and says, okay, you've got 15 pounds, you have 2 shades of gray, an ivory, and a kind of a taupe, and they like that herringbone sample that you did. They want 5 blankets, go. Right, and I have to come up with a design that will use those amounts of colors appropriately, so that I don't get to the 4th and a half blanket and realize, oh, I'm running out of ivory. You know, so that's always a little tightrope walk there, you know, but I find that sort of thing just enormously challenging and fun. At the same time, I have then this sort of, I can use my sort of private retail line as a way of experimenting with things like, gosh, I had this idea when I was working on this thing for them, but of course that wasn't going to really work for one reason or other. But here I can play with it over here. Would this work to offer as a wholesale sample? Would this work? Would this scale up? How much yarn would this use? Is this a structure that would work on my looms? So that it becomes this sort of a little more experimental, a little more of a play space. Some things that I do make that I love, that I realize, well, there's no way on God's green earth if that's going to work as a wholesale product, because it would cost $1,000 a blanket, you know. But otherwise, you know, it's just a lot of fun. So I find that having those 2 places to play off against each other is just, again, this really fertile space for me. And of course, the commission work is sort of 2 different kinds. I get the chance to work with farmers who are raising their sheep. but I also get to work with designers, and that sort of comes from two ends of the spectrum, right? So the farmer comes to the mill, they have their raw fleece, they know they brought, maybe they brought 200 pounds of fleece to the mill, and they see certain colors in their fleece. But when it comes to me, it's yarn, and it's had loss from the grease. It might be 50% once it's weighed. I mean, when they wash a dirty fleece, all that dirt, which is weight, is lost, right? So then it comes to me, but they don't really recognize it then as their fleece, right? So I have to somehow work with them to help them understand this is what you're getting back, these blankets. So that's always fun. But I love working with the farmers. In one sense, my background, even before my own sheep breeding, my dad was a farmer. So, talking to farmers is very comfortable for me. I love it. I get to go help on shearing days, that sort of thing. But then working with designers can be very different, because designers, they don't have a farm background, they have an industry background. And they think of, even though they're excited about the idea of perhaps local wools, they still have a commodity kind of mindset. And they don't understand that if you come to me and I say, yes, I can get you Lincoln long wool, purebred wool. And they say, okay, and can we have those blankets in 6 weeks? And no, because those sheep are still out in the field and they need to be sheared. And in a year, we can get you those blankets. So that it's just a completely different mindset about, the seasonality of this product. And that it might be worth the wait if that's what you're looking for. So.
It sounds like you have to do a lot of educating along the way.
Yeah, and that's fun. That's fun because you're talking about stuff that's just fabulously interesting, or at least to me. I mean, one of the things I love about Elizabeth Zimmerman is in one of her books. She says people complain that knitting's too hard or they could never do it, and she says, oh, pish woman, she says, you can put up your hair, you can shuffle cards. Knitting is no harder than any of that. She said, if you don't want to knit, just don't knit. And but she says, but I love knitting, and I'm going to talk about knitting. And that's always my philosophy is, if you don't want to talk about wool or weaving, that's fine. You don't have to talk about it. But I'm going to talk about wool and weaving.
I meant to tell you that we're not talking about that anymore. We're gonna have all new titles, new topics. Well, I do want to bring up Batenkill Fiber Mill. Batenkill Fiber Mill, because you have a very close relationship with them, and it's interesting because they get commissions from you of things you've made, but then you also buy their fleece or yarn, right?
Right.
So how does that relationship work for you?
Well, the relationship started when Mary Jean Packer, who's the owner of the mill, and I met the year I moved up here. In fact, she and her partner own Maple Land Farms as well, which is a major maple syrup producer in this area. And I was checking out at their maple pancake breakfast one morning. They have 3 breakfasts in the spring. And she had wool on her counter, and I leaned forward and tipped the basket and said, do you have any of that on cones? And she practically leapt over the counter and said, are you a weaver? We held up the line. People were yelling at us. She was yelling back, I'm the owner, I can talk to her. So we started working together, and we just really clicked in terms of both our obsession about wool and our excitement about it, and this idea that we could really generate local wool, surely showcase how good the small farm flocks of the Hudson region are, particularly when you marry them to the serious textile expertise of the city down in New York City and all along it, right? So the Textile Project goes from the Upper Adirondacks to the city. And that relationship has just been super rich for the two of us, I think. I mean, speaking for myself, I think it's been rich for her. I know it's been rich for me. So she sends me blankets and orders. When designers call me, I have her do the spinning, usually. And not because I wouldn't accept anybody else's spinning, but simply because, I can go talk to her. I can go discuss the wool with her. I can go, how much twist? Can we do this a little tighter? What about apply? That sort of thing. And And so that works both ways. She's more than happy to try all sorts of experiments. You know, this East Frisian alpaca wool was an experiment for us. She's encouraged me to work with singles, right? I had not spun or not woven with singles before. And so now what I do with a lot with her is have her spin. So this is a very cost-effective way to have custom yarn done, which is what I'm ordering from her. In fact, I'm thinking about a 200-pound order right now, in fact. So to have her spin a yarn, a singles that is, say, 2,500 yards per pound, and then only take half of that to ply it, so that I have a fine singles. It's very nice for those lace, that Atwater Bronson lace scarf that you showed up in the last one. But when it's plied, that becomes about a 1,400 yards per pound plied yarn, which is just lovely for those blankets to wrap around my grandkids and to wrap around, you know, that can be couch throws and such. So that becomes a really useful way to leverage what she can do and, you know, allow me to work with all sorts of varieties of yarn. It's also fascinating because the mill does work for so many different people, and she always has fascinating mill ends down there. You know, when the mill gets an order for, I want 100 pounds of this yarn, the mill generally makes 110, 115, because they want a cushion there of, you know, barring accidents, barring mistakes, barring errors. They might have 10 pounds at the end. That's not going to the customer, it's there on the shelf. I just discovered a beautiful, this is a merino hemp blend that she had spun for a machine knitter, in fact. But it was a lovely, interesting yarn. So I bought 5-6 pounds of it, whatever she had left, and brought it home. And it's made the most incredible sewing fabric. It's just gorgeous. It has both the feel of linen and wool. It's just wonderful. Just a wonderful fabric.
Well, this kind of leads into my next question, because one of the things I'm always struck about is because you're a dyer, right?
Right.
And the knowledge behind the scenes kind of thing. It's like I go to the store and I buy yarn, whereas you are very much hands-on involved in the kind of yarn and the twist and that sort of thing. And I always wonder how that impacts on what you do. And the same thing here with dyeing. And that was my question, what I'm getting to, is that when you dye your own yarn, how does that change? Because you're behind the scenes, may not be the right term, but you're really behind the scenes and you know what you're going to get and that kind of thing. So when you dye your own yarn, how does that change how you choose colors, how you use colors, how you view colors?
So in my work, when I'm doing work for the mill, that's often very much just the natural colors of the wool, right? So a lot of taupes, a lot of browns, a lot of grays, you know, some charcoals, a lot of shades of white and cream and ivory, right? When I do my own work, I don't think of myself as a strong colorist, right? So I know how to dye. I love dyeing. Dyeing helps me understand color more because I try and use my own recipes in a sense, right? So you use just the primary colors and then blend, right? And make them darker or lighter. So that's a way for me of understanding the relationships between colors, right? So that I know if I'm using the same blue, it's like a painter. I never understood this, but I guess painters in a painting will use the same color family in order to make sure that it all goes together, right? And so that's by doing that, by using just the same three primaries, I'm able to play a little bit with how color marries. The ones that you have that are showing there, the little checkerboard one, which is a differential shrinkage project. That is a fun sort of, I guess in a sense, just accidental piece, because that is woven on 2 beams, right? So I have 2 back beams, and one beam is the silk, and one beam is wool, and you have to have the two because of the tension issues, right?
Mhm.
And when you weave that, it's so sleazy. It's hard even to handle it off the loom, simply because your fingers just go through it. So it's woven white, extremely loose, thrown in a hot water washing machine and shrunk, right? Which is where you get that lovely texture. The silk doesn't shrink, it puckers. The wool just felts a little bit beautifully. That's actually a white Corriedale singles that MJ did the spinning for me for in that lilac scarf. And then you throw it in the dye bath, which gets even more interesting, because the dye bath, they're both protein fibers, but they don't take the dye set the same, right? You put in a complex molecule, not one of the primary colors, but like a tertiary color, a color that's made up of many of the different colors, and that gets split differently, right? It's like watching a spectrum split in that cloth, so that you get very different colors. In that lilac one, you get a much deeper shade on the silk. When I've used a chocolate brown, a real dark, bitter, deep chocolate brown, it splits so that the wool becomes this wonderful milk chocolate and the silk becomes purple.
Really?
It's just gorgeous. It can be just gorgeous. There have been times when I took a burnt orange and got a beautiful pumpkin and olive green split. It can be just beautiful. The other things that are on the screen, the dye hanks. I do tend to do, I do a lot of, I'm a weaver. I do weaving for Christmas presents. So those are dish towel skeins there. And I love colorful dish towels. So my family gets dish towels. Like, I think they're on a schedule of every 4 years they get more dish towels. But they have to prove that they've been using them, because that's the rule in our house. If you can't show wear on something you got, you never get another one. Because I am a firm believer in the idea that, we create memories in what we use every day. I have no memory of the dish that came out once a year for Thanksgiving. But the cup that I used as a child day after day, I love that cup, right? So I want my kids, I want people who buy my stuff to be, making this precious because it was wrapped around the child, not because it sat on the shelf.
I love that.
Anyway, so that doesn't end up with your color question, but
no, but that's wonderful. I agree.
Yeah.
If you're not going to use it, excellent.
Yeah, but for color, I just feel like that's just such an endless exploration, and dyeing is the way that I have found just to try and figure some of that out. Yeah.
Well, talking some about your designing, do you draw by hand? We have an image here of some of your pencils and some sketches that you've done. Is that how you do most of your designing? Do you use a computer now instead, or both?
So that's a picture of color work, right? So I was playing with, I think that in fact, that blue and white sketch is a series of blankets that I did that I wanted to play with. And I had this lovely white Corriedale wool and dyed it that lovely sharp, sort of not a navy blue, but like I guess a royal blue or something like that. It was a lovely bright blue. And so for that kind of designing, you can see that I do use the colored pencils. I don't really understand how color works on a screen, simply because everybody's screen is different. I don't know what that looks like in real life, right? But the colored pencils, it helps me. It's one of those things that just the more I draw and play, the more my ideas become a little more solidified. And I'm old enough that, nice paper. I like nice paper. I like sharp pencils. I used to every time my kids would beg for colored pencils, I would give them my old set and I'd buy myself a new one. So, nice sharp points. I love that. But I do use the computer once I get to okay, I have so many pounds of yarn. How much can I put in the warp? How much can I put in the weft? I pretty much depend on two computer programs. Pixel was the first one I used, and that is still my favorite for doing that kind of production style thinking. And then Weave Point, I use Weave Point to run my computer looms, and I work a little bit with Weave Point that way. But yeah, I find that the handwork The early thinking I need to do by hand. I need to do with a good sharp pencil and nice colors. And but then as I'm really nailing down the edges of a project, then I'm moving to the computer. Yeah.
Well, I have a couple of how do you do this questions. One
Sure.
is, as a professional weaver, how do you take care of your creativity? How do you
Yeah.
not get stuck or
That's important. That's really important, particularly when, you know, as a production weaver and you're getting successful, you're starting to work a lot. I just finished up an order for 40 or the 40th equivalent twin blankets, all in white, all in diamond twill, that stack that you showed earlier. And so by the time that was done, I was really ready to go play with some dye pots because you know, it's been a long gray winter up here, and 40 white blankets was just kind of mind bending a little bit for me, you know. And you know, so you do things to take care of your creativity, right? I take long walks with my dog. I do a 1.5-mile walk every morning, rain or shine, unless it's actually dangerous to be on the snowy roads, because I just find, you know, getting out, being out in nature, listening to the birds, I find it's much better if I don't take my phone. If I don't listen, I listen to a lot of books on tape in the studio, but not when I'm walking. I want to see the birds. I want to see the leaves moving. I want to be present there. The other thing is we have a lovely little local pond. And I find I did this when I was in graduate school, that finding a place where I can just be and not even have coherent thoughts. It sounds so nutso, I think, but to just sit and stare at the pond and look at the shadows on the water, to, you know, look at the fish, notice changes in the bank, but just to be really quiet. And I try and do that every day. In fact, my husband laughs about I always walk home from work because I go out. I have one of my studios is a big basement walkout here at the house, and I go out the back door and I sit there and look at the pond and I poke at the bushes and I think about the gardens, and then I walk around to the front of the house and come in. So I'm always walking home from work, but I find that those two things are, you know, if I get too busy and just don't do that small thing, that can really impact on my mental health and my ability to just continue to be creative. Yeah.
Well, then I have another how do you question, which is, as a production weaver, how do you take care of yourself physically? Because that can really be taxing to be weaving nonstop like that.
Yeah, it is. And I must admit that I turned 61 this year and I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it. And you know, I started out as a farm girl, right? Started out working on the farm. So I've always been super strong. When I went back to school, I started working out because a professor told me, he said, you're going to be so scared of all these deadlines. Because you have to understand, I went back to school when I was like 50, right? 49. I went back and worked on my PhD. It had been 20 years since I'd been in school, right? So I started on this PhD, and he said, your body's going to interpret stress as fear, right? You're going to have deadlines. You're going to have questions that you were embarrassed you were asked in class. You were, you know, all of it, right? And he said, you need to go work out because you need to convince your body nothing is as scary as trying to hold that 40-second plank, right? And so that's when I started working out. And I work with a trainer once a week. I work then out by myself another time, and I lift weights because that, you know, you need to make sure that your body's daily work, lifting this beam back here, crawling under, working the fly shuttle, is not the hardest thing you're doing all week. It's actually a middle thing that you're doing. Your body is capable of much more than that. And so that kind of working out is super important. In fact, it was really hard for me in the pandemic when I couldn't go to the gym. And I'm just now back to the gym about 3 weeks now, and I can just feel so much stronger, so much better. And then of course, you know, you gain, you know, every once in a while you go to the physical therapist and say, talk to me about my hands, because my hands, you know, I really don't want carpal tunnel surgery. And so I have a collection of stretches and exercises for the hand that I do every time I work out. So it's, you know, that's one of the things that you have to just pay attention to, I think, as you get older. The other thing is, I think that we don't give ourselves enough permission to modify our looms. And I was super lucky in that this loom, Stella here behind me, I name all my looms, of course, and this is Stella, and I named her that because I wanted something to yell when I was upset at learning her. So Stella. It came with this amazing modification. So most fly shuttles on an AVL are the cord that you pull. It's incredibly asymmetrical. It's incredibly hard on your back. It's hard on your elbows. And of course, then the AVL has the other problem of 1 foot treadle is very tough and 1 foot treadle is very soft. But the previous owner on this loom did a modification where they moved the hand cord down to the soft treadle. They reversed it on the loom. So now I have 2 hands on the beater and I beat, and both feet, 1 foot changes the harness, and the other foot kicks and throws the treadle. And it is the easiest weaving loom I've ever had. And it's so symmetrical. I could just sit there and weave for hours and I'm not putting my back out. So I think that anything that makes a loom work for us better, we should be doing that stuff. We should be doing that stuff.
Now, what kind of a loom is that behind you? What is Stella?
So Stella is a professional Dobby loom. So she's a 16 harness, 60 inches wide. She's sort of my mid-size loom. And she's got a mechanical Dobby head, right? So I can do a lot of interesting things on her. My large loom is a 24 harness power loom. It's the AVL industrial Dobby, and it's a computer Dobby. It runs on an air compressor that lives in my garage, and the air is piped down through the house into the basement here. You know, I can weave. I can put a lot of yarn on her. Yeah, she's the one I did the 40 twin size blankets on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Her name is Ida.
Ida.
Yeah.
Ida.
And then my small loom, which is kind of funny. My small loom is at the shirt factory where I have another space, and she's a 40-inch wide mechanical Dobby folding loom. So she's Fulda, and she's a great loom to have in that space simply because she's a bigger loom than most people see, and most people never see a mechanical Dobby head, right? Which is an early industrial machine. So.
Well, you have these large looms. Do you make samples on a smaller loom at all, or?
Yes, that's really what Fulda has become. The little folding
okay.
Dobby loom has really become my sample loom. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Which is, you know, I often think that before I had this loom, I have to admit, I would have thought that was the loom I would keep forever. Now I'm kind of thinking this loom is the loom. I will fit this in my nursing home room.
So you're ready to say we all have our nursing home looms.
That's right. I'm thinking that I could probably just swing a hammock between the beams here, and I don't need a bed. I can just light right there. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, in researching you, I am struck about how hard you work, period, but also how hard you work to promote supporting local fibers. Can you talk some about that? Why that's such a passion for you? You've talked some already about it, but
yeah, it really is a passion for me. I think it has to do with realizing that the fiber community, and this part of this is my research work, part of this is my own natural bent, but the fiber community, in its celebration of individual creativity, individual innovation, is a really unusual place. It's a really unusual place. We don't celebrate conformity so much here. I mean, there's plenty of conformity, but we don't. That's not what we celebrate. We're generally celebrating other things, and I find this. If we enlarge our vision to what the fiber community is, to include the farmers, to include, you know, the people working at the mill, to include the mill processor, think of how much more exciting that could be to hear all those voices. In my research, one of the words, PhD people, we love our big words. So one of the words that I just adore is the term heteroglossia, which is the idea of the multiple voices of the community, all speaking at once, all the cacophony of creativity. And that's what I think this is. I go back to Elizabeth Zimmerman. She wanted to talk to knitters. She got real sick of talking to knitting publishers, and she got real sick of talking to, the Wisconsin designer craftsmen, trying to explain why knitting is an art form. But boy, could she talk the hind leg off of knitters, and she liked them to talk back to her. And so I think about Ravelry, where there's how many tens of thousands of interest groups, all the voices of people who love fiber and knitting and spinning and weaving, and just all the ways that we can bring that creativity into the most ordinary pieces of our lives, right? The most ordinary, we talk about creativity as a kind of sacred work, right? Well, what could be more sacred than the idea that I'm going to make this cloth, and with this cloth, I'm going to wipe my lips after I have a meal? What could be more sacred, And so the idea of that community of people, and to be part of that, to recognize all the far-flung edges of it, there's just nothing more exciting to me. There's just nothing.
Oh, that's amazing. I love your philosophy.
Well, I'm not saying I really want a wool dish towel, but there's a place for that. Yeah.
Well, I have to admit, I have some envy here, because you do have two studios, and one is your home studio, as you mentioned, and then another one is in another building. So how does that work for you? Are there advantages, disadvantages? Why have you done that?
Yes, I find that to be a really tremendously advantageous sort of situation for me. And again, Kathy, you're making me say this is falling between two boxes here that I love. I keep finding that such a rich place. So in my home studio, that's where I do all my production work, right? It's where I have the power loom. It's all run by solar panels. I have my big looms here. I don't have to worry about people coming into this space. I don't have to keep it nice. It can be a workspace. In fact, at the beginning of the year, if you come into my studio here, you will find that I have bags and bags of all sorts of yarn that I've gathered up. I've put a project paper with it. It's ready to go. It's, but these are all just sitting around here, right? And so this is the real working space. And I'm an introvert. I like my quiet space here. It's got my pond out the back door. I can relax. But the shirt factory then, which is a converted industrial space that actually used to be a shirt factory here in Glens Falls, is a lovely space for when I want to have customers, for when I want to meet somebody to discuss designs, for when I want, so it's a big artist colony, and I can participate in in seasonal kinds of events. When we do big Christmas sales, that's always fun to be part of. When we, all summer long, they have a food truck corral and on Thursday nights. And so I try and be open there on Thursday nights. But it's also important because they have an industrial waste system. And my house has a septic system, and I live in fear that I will dye something and then I will see it in that wetland out there. I will turn the wetland bright pink. And so, I have to dye somewhere else. And so that becomes this wonderful space where when I can't stand being at the house anymore, I can go there, I can spend the day dyeing, I can meet customers there. It just is this nice way of splitting up where I'm working, right? Mm-hmm. So that I'm not trapped in my basement studio all the time, but I have this other space. So yeah, I find that it works really well for me. And at Christmas time, it's just so much fun. You open up the doors, you organize it to display a little bit, people come in, they look at the loom. It's just especially fun to have that folding dobby there, because people come in and that's that lovely, I don't know if, I assume most people know what a folding dobby is on this channel, but they see that moving around and it's like an old-fashioned music box, and then they look and you get everybody interested, from the engineering dads who are so tired of walking around an art space, and the kids who want to do this, and then I love that. I don't want to do it all the time, but I love it.
Oh, that's great. Well, let's hit some questions from the audience. How's that? We have a lot. So I'm going to start with Well, this is a shout out to you from Jill Robinson. Hi, Lily. It was great to meet and chat with you last Saturday at Batenkill Fiber Mill.
Yes.
So your entourage is watching
Yes,
today.
we had a fiber tour, so it was just lovely. A lot of people went to
good.
farms. Yeah.
This is from Ellie Sharp. I'm exploring becoming a fiber farmer and curious what you would recommend as a starter sheep breed, both from usability of wool and also demand. And as a part two to the question, what is your best advice for would-be small-scale sheep farmers?
Well, first of all, it depends on what part of the country you're in.
Oh.
You don't want to raise the fine wool breeds here in the humid Northeast, right? They don't do so well. But the things like Romney, Cordale, Cormo does well here. Shetland, there's a lot of Shetland. So breed depends on land type. Drier land, you want stuff that's, you know, that's a little easier on that land. Wetter land, you got to have something that's going to have resistance to foot issues, right? So it depends, right? So, you know, you gotta key the type of animal to the land. But a good all around, you know, it's hard to beat Cordale. It's hard to beat Romney. It's hard to beat something like Coopworth, right? I mean, if my husband and I, when people would say to him, why do you have sheep? He would say, well, you know, farmer once told me that when the animal gets loose, you want to be chasing something smaller than you. So, and they're gonna get loose, right? So, you know, you don't want to, if you're a big person, then you can handle a bigger sheep. I liked Cordales because, you know, they come about hip high. You're not trying to catch something that's around your kneecap like some of the Shetlands are, but you're not trying to catch a tank either, like some of the Rambouillet can be, or some of the Romneys can be quite big animals. So you want to go with that. I have to admit now though that Cordale is not one of my favorite wools to weave with, because it blooms so much in the finishing. You know, it's hard to get a Cordale wool that doesn't end up feeling like a sweater because it's just so cushy, right? So, you know, there's a lot of things. If that person wants to private message me, I'd be happy to talk more, because, you know, I love it. I think of myself, if I were young again, I'd have sheep in a red hot minute, but I'm not. I'm 61, so.
Well, Susan McCarthy wants to know, I primarily weave for my family and once a year for a fundraiser auction items. I do not know how to correctly price my consigned items without underselling my woven items.
That's a good question. And everybody struggles with that. My goal is to produce for a middle class range. I want people to be using my blankets. I don't want them to only, you know, be going to somebody to be pretty in a picture. So I try and pay myself $20 an hour, and then I cost for materials. And that's my bottom charge. That's my rate. And so I don't keep track of hours for absolutely, but I'm also doing 6 to 10 items in that warp, right? So it's not hours per one thing, it's hours over 6 to 10, right? So that makes a difference. And so once a year, I do a real serious time study. From the day I pick a what would be a mid-size order for me, so like 4 to 6 blankets from the mill. I get the yarn and I start keeping track of exactly how much time I spend. And then when that's done, meaning it's back at the mill ready for delivery, that's how I divide that out. And that becomes my sort of cost per hour for the year, in a sense. So as I get better, as I get faster, as I buy an automatic beam winder or buy an automatic pern winder, then I can, you know, I can change that because it takes me less time to wind the beam, takes me less time to wind the perns. So that's how I do my time cost. If you're doing just 1 or 2 things, that's much more difficult because you're taking a lot of time to do one thing, and that's not the same as the way a production weaver would be working.
Well, Laura Womack said, I dye silk, wool, scarves. No, I dye silk and wool. And she said, wool scares her a bit. I've just ordered a fleece that I'd like to dye. Any tips for not felting? Ack.
Well, of course, again, that depends on the type of wool, right? Some fleeces you can't felt with a stick, they're just really resistant to felting. Others, if you breathe heavily on it, you're going to get felting. So it depends on the type of fleece. For dyeing, you have to wash it first. You can't dye in the grease because otherwise you're just not going to get the dye molecule to enter the fiber. It's going to be stuck in the grease and the dirt. So what people do, and this is a old hand spinning technique, is to take small mesh bags like onion skin bags, right? And take small handfuls of a fleece, separate it out, not teasing out your lock structure too much, but putting that in very gently in hot soapy water and not agitating it, but just letting it soak for a good half an hour. Pull that out again, do the same thing, just rinsing, just pull that out, and as agitating as little as possible. You can wash pretty much anything, you just have to be super careful. Now, with that said, on a Romney fleece, you can put the whole thing in there. You can just put the whole thing. You don't have to worry about a bag. It's just not going to felt that fast. So it depends on the breed type. I think it's Clara Parks who just did a fleece and fiber book. Yeah, get that. Get that.
That is a fascinating book. It's a great book.
And your first fleece, if you're thinking you're going to like dyeing fleece, get a fleece that it's not going to felt so badly.
Do you dye the fleece before you spin it, or do you always dye afterwards?
Well, I am not really working with raw fleeces so much anymore. And when I buy a clip and send that to the mill, I'm generally getting that spun up in its natural colors. And then once it's on the cones and comes back to my studio, I'm preparing it then for dyeing. In fact, I'm scanning off about 10 pounds of a white blend Romney Cordell with a little alpaca in it to head to the dye pots here in another week or so, because those white blankets are driving me. I would like some bright blue. I would like some peach. I would like, yeah. All my daffodils and tulips are blooming, and I'm thinking those are nice. I like that color. But so mostly I'm dyeing in the skeins.
Well, Janet Stolnitz said she wanted to see the revised fly shuttle modification. I would encourage her to give you a shout.
Sure, and it's also on. I posted a file on Facebook on AVL Looms Buy, Sell, and Trade. But
okay,
yeah, there are two AVL groups. There are two AVL groups on Facebook, and one of them has that file. So
you too, Phyllis, you can go there and check that out. Okay.
Yeah.
Are you connected to the fiber shed movement? It sounds like a natural connection. That's from Ruth.
Oh yeah,
Tang.
I love the fiber shed movement, except fiber shed sort of models itself on the idea of a food shed and on a water shed, and there are some major similarities there. I think that it is important that when we work with local stuff, that we're trying to work within the parameters of the biology that we have. Right? You cannot make, rosemary grow in a wetland. You can't, you have to play with the pieces you're given here. But at the same time, I'm very aware that textiles, for freak's sake, what was the Silk Road except the long distance traveling of textiles? Textiles are not going to spoil. Textiles are not going to, they're not going to be harmed by a long travel, right? So in one sense, the idea of a fiber shed is a little artificial. And I think we need to be careful not to just embrace that idea without really seeing, well, some of those parameters that we've set are not useful to us. Some of them are, but some of them are not. So like here in the Hudson Valley, where we're the Hudson Valley Textile Project, and we're trying to go the length of the Hudson Valley, but we're also seeing that New York just, in fact, I wanted to mention this, New York has a New York certified and grown product program where their foodstuffs got special benefits, were open to special programs that were grown, sourced, processed here. So like New York State apples, New York State dairy, New York State jams, everything, right? Maple syrup. But because one of our state representatives saw the fuss that Bernie Sanders mittens made on national media, she made a pair of New York State mittens and stood in our state assembly and talked about, we need to support New York State fiber. And she did it. We got a line item in the budget just a week or so ago. And so now the fiber is accepted as New York State grown and certified. So that's going to go all the way out the full state, right? All the way to Buffalo. And so, you know, I love the idea of fiber shed. It would be ridiculous to say we can't do that because, you know, Buffalo is not within 150 miles. So I think, you know, there are some great ideas there. I love the idea of local. We just need to be careful that we're not drawing boundaries that aren't useful to us.
Right, right. Well, Lilly, I have had a lovely time today. Thank you so much. Isn't it amazing how fast an hour goes?
It is. It could be very fast. And there are
I could sit and talk with you for days.
I wish I could talk about. But anyway, it's a great program. I'm so glad you guys are doing it.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you showing up today and sharing with us all about your looms and your work. And I hope it goes for a long, long time.
Thank you so much.
If anybody wants to know more about Lilly, go to her website, lillymarsh.com.
LillyMarshStudios.com.
Studios.com. I'm sorry.
Yes.
It's right there in front of me, lillymarshstudios.com. There's all kinds of information, and she has links to podcasts, and you can stay very entertained on her website. So I encourage you all to go check that out. I want to make a special thanks to Made in America Yarns for sponsoring today's episode of Textiles and Tea. You can see a full range of all their yarns at their website at madeinamericayarns.com. I went on there today and they had this really cool yarn called Cat Combo Twist. It's like a boucle and a chenille mixed together. So go check them out. They have some great combinations if you're looking for something like that to weave or knit. If you would like to sponsor Textiles and Tea, or your business or your guild, please go to our website, weavespindye.org, and get more information on how you too can be a sponsor. Textiles and Tea is supported by the generous donations to the Fiber Trust. If you would like to see more programming like this, please support HGA by either becoming a member or donating to the Fiber Trust, or both, at our website at weavespindye.org. If you enjoy today's program, you want to watch it again, or you only got to see part of it, or you invite a friend to come watch it with you, all the Textiles and Tea are recorded. And you can see today's episode or any of those on the HGA Facebook page. You do not have to have a Facebook account to watch it. Next week, I'm very excited. We're going to have Sue Weil on. Sue's out of California and does these incredible weavings. She's a beautiful tapestry artist. I hope you'll come and join us. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope you have a great week. I'll see you next Tuesday. Happy tea.